Picture yourself walking into the Colosseum nearly 2,000 years ago. The sun beats down, the crowd roars, and in the center of the arena, human beings are about to die for entertainment. For the Romans, cruelty was not hidden in back alleys, it was performed openly, celebrated as if it were an art form. Amphitheaters across the empire became engines of blood, where men were butchered for applause, women were humiliated for spectacle, and animals were transformed into living weapons. At its peak, Rome staged games so extravagant that thousands of people and animals would be crammed into the underground chambers known as the Hippodrome, waiting to be released into the sand above. Each emperor tried to outdo the one before him, leaving a bloodier mark on history. Prisoners were fed to beasts while the audience casually ate lunch. Artificial lakes were dug so condemned men could drown by the thousands in naval battles staged for spectacle. The message was clear. Rome's power was measured not just in conquests, but in its ability to command life and death as entertainment. The origins of gladiator combat stretch back to 264 BCE. It began not as a citywide performance, but as a grim funeral ritual. The sons of Decimus Junius Brutus honored their father by staging 3 pairs of fighters in the Forum Boarium. This ritual was called a munus, meaning a duty or a gift to the dead. The fight was meant to be a blood offering carried out in the shadow of grief, but grief soon turned into something else entirely. As generations passed, these contests grew larger, more elaborate, and more detached from their original meaning. By the 2nd century BCE, the numbers had exploded. In 216 BCE, the funeral of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus featured 22 pairs of fighters. By 183 BCE, that number had grown to 120. What began as ritual mourning had transformed into a system that consumed thousands of lives, all to satisfy the appetite of a restless crowd. The question is, who were these men forced to fight? Most of them were enslaved people, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to the games. The Romans had a phrase for them, damnati ad ludum, the condemned to the arena. But desperation could also drive free men to volunteer. Debt, poverty, or the lure of fame led some to sign contracts as gladiators. These volunteers were known as auctorati. Yet the moment you stepped into the arena, whether enslaved or free, your legal status collapsed. In Roman law, gladiators were branded as infame social outcasts stripped of honor and rights. Julius Caesar himself passed a law forbidding anyone who bound himself as a gladiator from ever holding public office. To fight in the arena was to embrace disgrace. The oath spelled it out in stark terms: to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. Signing meant surrendering your body to torture and death. This was no small affair. Gladiator schools became full-scale industries. The largest of all, the Ludus Magnus, stood directly beside the Colosseum, connected by an underground passage so fighters could be marched straight into the arena. Inside, a massive training ground surrounded by seats looked like a private stadium. Dozens of smaller schools across the empire worked the same way, drilling men relentlessly to supply Rome's endless hunger for blood. Life inside the gladiator schools was brutal. Fighters were housed in barracks, drilled daily, and punished harshly for disobedience. Archaeological evidence, like the cemetery at Ephesus, reveals much about their existence. Studies of bones conducted in 2014 showed that gladiators were fed diets heavy in barley and beans, giving them the nickname barley men. They even drank a strange tonic made from plant ash, rich in minerals, which helped strengthen their bones after repeated injuries. This wasn't about health. It was about keeping battered bodies standing long enough to fight again. Medical care was part of the system as well. The famous physician, Galen, whose writings shaped medicine for centuries, began his career treating gladiators in Pergamum. He learned trauma surgery by patching up their wounds and even bragged about lowering death rates compared to his predecessors. But compassion had nothing to do with it. Gladiators were valuable investments. They were repaired only to be thrown back into the grinder of the arena. The fights themselves were carefully staged, not random brawls. Gladiators were divided into distinct types, each with specific weapons, armor, and fighting styles. The retiarius carried a net and a trident, agile and lightly armored. His traditional opponent was the secutor, equipped with a large shield and sleek helmet designed to withstand the net. The mormillo wore a heavy fish-crested helmet and broad sword, while the thraex carried a curved blade. The point was balance. By pitting different styles against one another, organizers kept the battles dramatic and unpredictable. And yes, the Romans even had referees. Known as the summa rudis, these men carried sticks to pause the action or separate fighters when things became too chaotic. Ancient mosaics show them clearly standing in the arena. Yet the referee's decision could be overturned at any moment by the editor, the sponsor of the games. This was often a wealthy politician seeking to win popularity, or the emperor himself. A simple gesture of the hand could decide whether a man lived or died. So, what about the famous thumbs down? The truth is murky. Ancient writers mention gestures, but none agree on exactly what they meant. Some claim that a closed fist with a thumb pressed to the palm meant mercy, while a thumb thrust outward signaled death. Regardless of the exact gesture, the meaning was the same. The crowd could roar, but the final call rested with the editor. In one chilling story carved into a gladiator's tombstone, a fighter won his match fairly only to be killed when the referee's decision was reversed. The end of a fight was rarely merciful. Skeletons from Ephesus reveal cracked skulls where helmets should have offered protection. Some bones even show signs of finishing blows delivered after the fight had already ended. Execution strikes from a hammer, a weapon nicknamed the Dispater, the bringer of death. Other skeletons carry healed wounds, scars of men who survived one day's ordeal only to be patched up and sent back into the arena for another. This was not sport. It was execution disguised as entertainment. Every fight was a gamble with mutilation, suffering, and death. Even if a gladiator survived, he was still property forced to bleed again and again for the amusement of others. Gladiators may have been the stars of the arena, but Rome's appetite for spectacle went far beyond duels in the sand. The emperors constantly tried to outdo one another, each striving to leave behind games more extravagant and terrifying than his predecessor. And in this competition for blood, cruelty reached staggering heights. One of the most shocking inventions was the Naumachia mock naval battles staged not on open seas, but inside man-made lakes or even amphitheaters temporarily flooded. Julius Caesar pioneered the practice in 46 BCE. He ordered a massive basin dug near the Tiber River, filled it with water, and launched real warships into combat. On the decks, thousands of condemned men prisoners of war, criminals, or the enslaved were forced to row and fight until their vessels shattered and their bodies sank beneath the surface. To heighten the drama, Caesar even assigned themes. One side played Tyrians, the other Egyptians. But every show ended the same way: wrecked ships, floating corpses, and water stained red while the crowd roared. Augustus, Caesar's heir, escalated the madness. In 2nd BCE, he built a permanent basin across the river in Transtiberum, boasting of its size in his memoirs. It stretched nearly 1/3 of a mile long and over 1/5 of a mile wide, an artificial ocean carved into the heart of Rome. On this stage, Augustus claimed that 3,000 men and 30 warships clashed, with thousands more rowing. To keep the basin full, he even commissioned a new aqueduct, the Aqua Alsietina. Rome literally diverted rivers, not for drinking water, but for blood. Claudius took things further still. In 52 CE, he staged a naval battle on Lake Fucine, using criminals already sentenced to death. Ancient writers say this is when the most famous line in gladiatorial history was spoken. Before the fight, the men cried out, "Ave Imperator moriturite salutant!" "Hail, Emperor! Those who are about to die salute you!" Claudius smirked and gave no reply before forcing them to fight anyway. Surrounded by guards with no escape, they drowned or were cut down until the last survivor fell. The sheer logistics of these spectacles were staggering. Engineers installed trapdoors and floodgates, shifting entire landscapes to suit the emperor's whims. Some historians even argue that early shows inside the Colosseum itself involved miniature naval battles, though later renovations made this impossible. But whether in flooded arenas or vast basins, the principle was always the same. Spectacle demanded death, and Rome had no shortage of lives to spend. What did the spectators see? Ships ramming one another at full speed, timber splintering, and men hurled overboard. In heavy armor, they sank like stones. Those who stayed aboard fought desperately with swords, spears, and even catapults mounted on deck. Once a ship broke formation or took water, its crew faced only two choices: be butchered while boarding an enemy vessel, or vanish beneath the waves. And through it all, the audience cheered from dry land, delighted at the carnage. If the mornings were filled with gladiators and the occasional naval battle, then the beast hunts, the venaciones, were the spectacles that truly set the tone of the day. To Romans, these were not warm-ups before the main events. They were headliners in their own right, showcasing the empire's power over nature itself. The first recorded venatio dates back to 186 BCE, when Marcus Fulvius Nobilior celebrated his victory by releasing lions and panthers into an arena. From that point on, hunts became tradition. Every morning, the Colosseum floor transformed into a manufactured wilderness. Engineers crafted fake groves, rocky ridges, and pits. The hypogeum beneath the arena came alive with a network of cages and lifts. 60 giant capstans and dozens of trapdoors allowed animals to explode suddenly into the sand, taking hunters and spectators alike by surprise. To the crowd, it was magic. One moment the arena was quiet, the next a leopard sprang from a hidden hatch, or a bear lumbered out from beneath the stage. But behind the scenes, the cruelty was calculated. Animals were starved to ensure aggression. If hunger didn't push them forward, whips, hot irons, and prods did. The men who faced them were specialists known as venatores or bestiari. Trained in dedicated schools such as the ludus matutinus, the morning school, they wielded spears, nets, or short swords. The organizers promoted these hunts as contests of skill, but in truth, no amount of training could even the odds against a charging lion or a frenzied rhinoceros. The animals themselves were part of the spectacle's message. Rome imported predators from every corner of the empire: lions and leopards from Africa, crocodiles and hippos from the Nile, wolves and boars from Europe, even elephants and ostriches. Each beast represented not only danger but also conquest. By displaying exotic creatures, the empire reminded its citizens that its reach extended farther, deeper, and wider than any other civilization. The numbers were staggering. Augustus bragged that during his reign he staged 26 hunts in which 3,500 African animals were slaughtered. At the grand opening of the Colosseum in 80 CE, Cassius Dio records that 9,000 animals, both wild and tame, were killed. Under Emperor Trajan, following his Dacian victories, games stretched for more than 100 days and butchered over 11,000 animals. And cruelty was not reserved for beasts. At midday, the arena shifted from hunts to executions, the ludi meridiani. These were not battles, they were butchery dressed as theater. Condemned criminals, rebellious slaves, prisoners of war, and even Christians were dragged into the sand to be torn apart. Some were tied to posts while lions or bears were released upon them. Others were strapped to platforms and mauled alive. To make the killings more entertaining, they were staged as fatal charades. Victims were forced to play roles from myths: Orpheus trying to charm animals before being ripped apart, bandits crucified to resemble legendary villains. After the Great Fire of 64 CE, Nero accused Christians of arson and turned their executions into gruesome theater. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were nailed to crosses or burned alive to illuminate his gardens at night. Even Tacitus, who had little sympathy for Christians, admitted these were refinements of cruelty. As the sun reached its highest point, the games reached their darkest. After the beasts and executions, another cruel form of entertainment unfolded: the damnatio ad gladium, condemnation to the sword. This was not gladiatorial combat between trained fighters. Instead, condemned men were armed with broken gear, dull blades, and splintered shields, then forced to hack each other to pieces while the crowd enjoyed their midday meal. These were no contests of skill. They were chaos by design. One man might kill an opponent, but that did not grant survival. He would be shoved into another round, then another, until exhaustion or blood loss finally dropped him into the sand. There were no referees, no rules, no chance of mercy. The outcome was guaranteed: death. The arena staff worked like clockwork. Trapdoors in the hippodrome delivered body after body into the sand, ensuring that the spectacle never paused. Attendants dragged away the corpses with hooks, scattered fresh sand over the blood, and prepared the ground for the next wave. The result was relentless gore, an unbroken chain of screams and slaughter. Seneca, the philosopher, once confessed that after attending a midday show, he still heard the crowd chanting in his ears, "Kill him, flog him, burn him alive." He admitted that anyone who lingered too long risked becoming numb to cruelty or mocked as weak for feeling pity. These games trained Romans to accept brutality as normal, even desirable. But cruelty alone did not fuel the arenas. Politics did. Blood was a tool of power. Julius Caesar staged games so enormous that the Senate had to intervene with laws limiting how many gladiators one man could own. Still, he gathered hundreds of pairs to dazzle voters, using slaughter as a campaign strategy. Augustus, in his memoirs, bragged about the staggering body counts of men and animals killed under his rule, writing them down as though they were triumphs worth celebrating. When Titus inaugurated the Colosseum in 80 CE, he marked the occasion with 100 days of continuous games. During that span, thousands of men and nearly 9,000 animals were butchered. For emperors, the scale of spectacle equaled the scale of their glory. The more blood spilled, the more secure their rule appeared. Even logistics bowed to the thirst for cruelty. Entire aqueducts were built not to deliver clean water to citizens, but to flood arenas for mock naval battles. Exotic beasts were trapped, transported, and displayed, not as zoological wonders, but as doomed participants in Rome's theater of death. The empire bent nature, engineering, and human lives alike to serve its appetite for spectacle, and yet the violence carried risks. In 73 BCE, a group of gladiators in Capua led by a Thracian named Spartacus escaped their school. Their revolt grew into an army of 70,000 fugitives, defeating Roman legions again and again. For 2 years, they shook the empire to its foundations. When the rebellion was finally crushed, 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Appian Way, their bodies lining the road for miles, a horrific warning hammered into the memory of Rome. By the height of the empire, the arena was more than entertainment. It was a mirror of Roman society. For the crowd, the games provided thrills, distractions, and the illusion of power. For politicians, they were tools to win loyalty and votes. And for emperors, they were a stage to display absolute control over life and death. But the cost was staggering. Tens of thousands of men, women, and animals were sacrificed, not for justice, but for spectacle. Historians like Seneca warned openly that these shows corrupted the soul. He admitted that after watching he left more greedy, more ambitious, and less human. The philosopher was honest enough to say what others refused: the games trained citizens to enjoy cruelty. This was no accident. It was by design. The legacy of this system reached beyond the arena. Violence became political theater. Elections could be swayed by hosting extravagant games. Entire cities learned to equate power with blood. Even emperors themselves boasted of body counts as achievements, proof that Rome measured greatness in gallons of blood spilled. When death becomes a performance, society loses its moral compass. Sometimes pity broke through the roar of the crowd. During one show, elephants wounded in battle lifted their trunks as if begging for mercy. The audience for once turned against the spectacle. Writers remembered that moment precisely because it was so rare. For the most part, cruelty drowned out compassion. The machine rolled on, fueled by the screams of the condemned and the applause of the masses. Even the rebels who dared to resist paid the ultimate price. Spartacus and his followers fought bravely, but when they fell, their crucified bodies lined the roads as a warning. Resistance itself was turned into spectacle, reinforcing Rome's message: defy the empire, and you will die in agony for all to see. So why did Rome's games go too far? Because they stripped life of its value. Men were reduced to property, women were humiliated for theater, animals were tormented for novelty, and entire generations were conditioned to cheer at suffering. What began as a ritual of grief became a vast industry of death, and in the process humanity itself was eroded. Today, the Colosseum still towers over Rome. Tourists walk its corridors, marvel at its arches, and take photos of its ruins. But beneath those stones lingers the memory of thousands who bled and died for amusement. The silence of the empty arena speaks louder than the cheers that once shook its walls. The story of Rome's arena games is not just history, it is a warning. When cruelty is dressed as culture, when suffering is repackaged as entertainment, and when politics are built on blood, civilization walks a dangerous line. Rome may have fallen, but its lessons remain. And perhaps the darkest lesson of all is this: the games taught an empire to love inhumanity. And once that line is crossed, there is no way back. If you enjoyed diving into this hidden side of Roman history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends who love history as much as you do. And don't stop here. Check out the next video on screen, where we uncover another shocking story from the ancient world. See you there. Thank you for watching. Remember, we are the ones who remember, the ones who question, the ones who refuse to bow to the silence of history. And you, are you ready for the next secret of Rome?